Third time.
Say that again.
Yeah. Can I raise this? Okay. So a little bit about me. First of all, Marcus almost had me in tears 3 times because I share a very similar story. I've been around wounds since I was 8 years old. But a little bit about me. I've been doing wound care for 16 years. I'm a wound care nurse. I've been an LPN for 16 years. I'm the only LPN in the United States that does what I do. I'm the first one in the United States that was certified in wound care. I'm the first and only LPN that writes for Woundsource magazine. I blog every month. I was just accepted to the Association for the Advancement of Wound Management for the Speakers Bureau, only LPN ever. I made history. I'm on the UHMS, I'm on the board for the Midwest chapter. I've been doing hyperbarics as well. Not so much lately, I don't have time. I also teach wound care certification, the only LPN. And I recently joined UberWoundCare as the Vice President of Nursing Education. And then I also do have my own business, founder of wound care education consultant. So I don't have much time for anything really, but I'm having fun doing it. I'm very passionate about what I do. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about pressure injuries, obviously, and I don't know really what kind of crowd I have. How many of you are in the wound care center setting? What about long-term care? Okay, what about home health?
We're rehab.
Okay, so it's all rehab. Oh, I'm hearing voices. Okay, well, the way my presentation sort of goes, I kind of touch on every setting because it's hard to give everybody, you know, the tips and everything, all the information. So, okay, so April 13th, just so you're aware, the terminology did change for pressure ulcer to pressure injury, in case some of you were not aware. And so the definition is pretty much the same. I'm not going to go over every little detail, but just so you're aware that it has changed. And as far as CMS, they have not moved forward as of yet as far as changing it within, you know, whether it's coding or things of that nature. So the etiology of pressure injuries, I mean, obviously this is where we're pinching off the blood supply. Just want to, you know, kind of get across, there is no such thing as a shearing ulcer or injury. Just want to kind of make sure you know that friction, rubbing 2 forces together, and shearing, which is a gravity force, those obviously, you know, equal pressure. So make sure when you're documenting that we are actually saying pressure injury, okay? Very important. And this is my quote. I love to make up quotes, by the way. A pressure injury lives in the middle of a combat zone where many times the skin surrenders. So, and this is my mother. So just like Marcus, I have a story too. And like I said, I about lost it 3 times hearing his. My mother was also diabetic. I remember sitting at the kitchen table filling up, you know, insulin syringes. I was 8 years old, and I would see wounds on her legs, and, you know, I couldn't understand why she always had scabs on her legs. You know, that's what I had always seen. I didn't know what they were. And then, you know, she ended up having complications from the diabetes, had a stroke. And I had, you know, a little baby at the time, and my other son was 2 years old, and he ran over my mom's little toe with his walker, and she ended up having a leg amputation. My mother died at 47 years old in my arms from complications from pressure injuries that she acquired at the hospital. And it's been 20 years ago, and I've been doing wound care 16 years. And most people, when they see a pressure injury, they think of me because I'm always, you know, preaching about pressure injuries. I feel like I've been put on this earth to do that. Just trying to get all over, you know, go everywhere I can to educate and help spread, you know, the awareness and get that message across of how important it is to prevent. So that's my story. And, you know, everything's about empowering others and just ongoing education. So it doesn't matter what setting you're in. If you're a caregiver at home, you know, it's so important that we're teaching, you know, everyone. I've even been in the grocery store, and if I see someone, you know, pushing their mother in a wheelchair, I actually go out of my way just to say something, even if I'm just kind of just saying one little thing just to make sure I'm educating them in a way that they don't even, you know, suspect. So, and so when I start going over the pressure injury information, I always tell everyone, you know, think like a state surveyor and act like a wound specialist. And the reason I say that is when I go to long-term care facilities, you know, they're under a microscope, and that's where I spend a lot of my time. They're always, you know, getting hammered with, you know, pressure injuries, you know, the investigation. So you will notice that, I mean, I am going over a lot of tips and guidelines that sort of tailor to them a little bit more so, but I think it's good for you to know that, you know those things as well, okay? If you go down to Florida, you will see buses going by that say 1-800-BED-SORE. This sort of lets you know, this is what it's turning into with legalities. You know, and look at this, you know, website, bedsores, pressuresores.com. I mean, everything is, you know, turning into neglect, elder abuse, and there is a lot going on with the terminology change on April 13th. You know, there's a big controversy because now that we're saying injury, think about what that really means. You know, this is going to be a problem, and it's going to be a good thing for attorneys, obviously. So there's going to be a lot going on. We'll have to see what happens. So it might be a good thing that CMS is sort of holding off for a bit. So 95% of pressure injuries are avoidable. And when we say a pressure injury is unavoidable, we want to make sure we can validate that with 2 to 3 comorbids. So maybe if we have you know, someone with dementia or they have MS, you know, we want 2 to 3 comorbids if we're going to try and validate that, maybe malnutrition and so on. Yes, they are life-threatening, like with my mother, you know, she went septic, so the quality of life, you know, that's the one thing I remember her saying was, you know, being in that room, just the 4 walls, it was like being in a prison. You know, we don't think of that when we're saying, well, you need to stay in bed, you need to stay out of your chair. We want them to be compliant, but try and think about what they're feeling too. It affects the caregiver, the family, you know, it affects everyone. And prevention is key. If we would put a little bit more money into the preventative measures, you know, we would spend less in the long run on trying to heal a wound. I'm seeing all different kinds of numbers, but around 60 to 90,000 nowadays for a stage 3 or 4 pressure injury to heal. Don't you love the hair flicking back? That's not me. But with reducing moisture, this is a big deal because a lot of times moisture, if we have especially with, you know, patients that have incontinence, a lot of times if we have like moisture associated skin damage, those type of areas the skin breaks down further and then they end up with a pressure injury. So we have to think about, you know, protecting that skin and making sure that, you know, if there's maceration, we want to protect and make sure that we're managing. Partial thickness areas, if they worsen into full thickness, they must be staged, okay? So remember, that's the way that all works. It'll keep breaking down. Some of the ways that we can do this would be zinc oxide. It's the #1 way to protect that skin. If we have a wound that, for instance, if we have a stage 3 to the coccyx, and the peri wound is broken down, we can use zinc oxide, you know, to the surrounding area. You know, think about what kind of underpads you're using for the patients. You know, there are breathable ones, there's disposable, you know, some of them are just so chintzy and horrible. You know, we want something that will be high wicking. That's what works, you know, best for a heavy wetter. Same way with the briefs. There's high wicking briefs. So, you know, really think about what you're trying to do, okay? So, you like the zebra butt? Managing pressure injuries, we want to develop a comprehensive pressure injury management program. And you know what I mean by that, we want to implement right away. So if we get an admission, we want to, you know, implement right away all the prevention. If we suspect anything, if we think they're high risk, we want to use our risk assessment tools. Put things in place right away. If they're in a wheelchair, don't wait to put a wheelchair cushion on their wheelchair. Obviously, they're in a wheelchair for a reason. They're at risk, okay? It cracks me up when I see, you know, they get the wheelchair out and they don't give them a wheelchair cushion, or they don't, you know, get their heels off of the bed. Why are you waiting? They obviously, you know, put the prevention in place from the get-go, okay? Same way with the barrier cream. You know, if they're not incontinent, obviously you don't have to do that, but just put it in place. We want to always make sure we're monitoring for signs and symptoms of infection, if there are wounds already, and you know, the care is aimed at optimizing healing. You know, we're looking for always to make progress with our wound healing, okay? Our little frog here, we are offloading, and I hope you're offloading while you're sitting in the audience. I know I was trying to every 15 minutes. But yes, offloading, true offloading is keeping that pressure off. It does not mean, you know, I see these little bunny boots or Spanko boots that are on our patients. Those add pressure. If your heels are not off the bed or floating, like the little boots with the heels that are cut out, the heel section, that is true offloading. You cannot put those little bunny boots on and say that you're using an offloading device. That's not the same thing. Same way when you're turning and repositioning, we want to make sure that they're off of those bony prominences. Make sure your staff is being educated appropriately, the right techniques. And this slide's out of order. I'm having a lovely day. Just bear with me, okay? The medical device pressure ulcer, I'm just going to go ahead and go over this and see the other slide said injury. So this is one of the other injuries that there's, you know, you do stage this, but this is from a medical device. And this can be from a Foley catheter, it can be from a nasal cannula. Now I just want to point out that if that ulcer or injury, if it's on the inside of the nares, that would be a mucosal. If it's more on the outside, that's when you would say medical device, okay? Anything mucosal you do not stage, but anything medical device, if it leaves the shape of like a Foley catheter, you know, whether it's a AFO, splint, what have you, even if it's from a brief, that would be considered, you would call that a medical device pressure injury, okay? And you do want to write an order for that to be checked on or monitored twice daily. And here's our mucosal pressure injury, and that's self-explanatory, anything in the mucosa. So with mattress therapy, this is very important. I see this in all of the facilities, the wrong mattress orders written and everything. So with low air loss, the difference between low air loss mattress therapy and then low air loss alternating pressure therapy, low air loss is the microclimate. All it is doing is blowing air up through that mattress lining, okay? We're cooling off basically that skin, keeping that microclimate, you know, at the same temperature, okay? With alternating pressure, we have cells that are intermittently, you know, moving. So if a provider is ordering, you know, low air loss, that would be for your patients that are maybe a stage 1 or a stage 2 pressure injury, or even hospice. If it's a low air loss alternating pressure mattress therapy order, that would be for stage 3 and stage 4, okay? And we already said prevention is key. We want to make sure that our orders are written like turn and reposition every 2 hours in PRN while in bed. don't ever lock yourself into at all times unless you really know that they're in bed at all times or that it's actually going to happen at all times, because if a state surveyor comes in, they're going to get you if it's not done. Same way with offloading heels, okay? You might want to just say as tolerated. So with offloading heels, we talked about this already a little bit, but make sure that they are truly floating or offloaded. As you can tell with that little booty on the left lower corner there, that is actually adding pressure. So that was what I was talking about. You do not want to use those. That would be a perfect choice for maybe a hospice patient, okay? Remember with seating, you know, with wheelchairs, there's so many different types of wheelchairs, and you know, just because it's a wheelchair doesn't mean that the cushion is automatically, you know, reducing pressure or redistributing. So make sure you're looking at that. Make sure it's the right size. I've seen patients have ulcers or injuries from, you know, their trochanter's, you know, actually they're too snug in the chair. So, you know, make sure you're evaluating that. This is from one of my blogs, this little chart, but, you know, when you're looking at cushions, there's numerous types of cushions. You know, we got our low-end cushions, which are foams, and we want to look for something water-resistant if that patient is incontinent. Our viscoelastic foam or gel cushions are always good, and they're, you know, more cost-effective. And then if we have a patient that's like a stage 3 or 4 pressure injury, we can, you know, use something more like, which I can say Roho, because it's one of a kind. That would be more of a high-end cushion. And say no to donuts. If I see one more donut cushion out there, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have a coronary. I'm from Ohio, and there are 2 doctors that order these, and I'm serious, I'm like gonna have a ceremony and burn them all. I see them all the time. Oh my goodness. So shearing, remember, you know, this is what causes the undermining and tunneling in a wound. But with shearing, always check that out as well with, you know, when they're sitting in a wheelchair or if they're sitting in the bed with the head of the bed up. You know, if they have that gravity force, that could be the reason why they are developing that pressure injury. You know, a lot of us just kind of think, oh, they're just laying in the bed, we're turning them, so they shouldn't have that area. You know, think about what they're doing all day, you know, and how they're positioned. It might not even, it might just be when they're in the chair that they're actually getting that shearing going on. You know, just kind of, you know, it's like an investigation. Really look and see what's going on, you know, during the day and at night, okay? Friction, rubbing 2 forces together, and that's what causes a blister. So like if you're looking at a patient's buttocks and you see 1 blister, you know that that's from friction. If you see a bunch of blisters or pustules, that is from moisture, okay? Just like if you have a brief on and you see 1 blister, what is that? That's friction. If you see that like in the groin, if it's a bunch of blisters, we know that's moisture. That's how you can tell the difference, okay? A lot of people get, you know, mixed up with that, and that's how I always teach that. It just makes it easier. So with the pressure injury stages, I am not going to go over these and teach you the basic wound care, you know, certification class. I'm not trying to make a wound care specialist out of you, but there are a few changes, and I want to make sure that you know those. So I'm just going to kind of run through them so that you have that information. So we still have our 6 stages, okay? There are 6 stages, so if you ever get asked that question on a certification exam, if you ever take that, make sure you answer that correctly. That's one everybody misses. There's stage 1 through 4, and then you have your unstageable, and then now it is called deep tissue pressure injury. It used to be called suspected deep tissue pressure, okay? And the other change are skin tones, and I just wrote about this in Woundsource. This is so important to me because I see this get missed all the time. On darker skin tones, please take your time when you're assessing the skin. It gets missed all the time. When you're looking at heels or any part of the body, it might look like a blue hue. And I mean, there's even research out there showing that, especially with African American, that those areas get missed. You really want to pay attention. So with the NPUAP guidelines, they have added this now, that they're showing you, these are the actual photos of the dark skin and the light skin, okay? So I think that's great they added that. These are the little cubes. They look like cake to me. Everything's about food, you'll see it here in a minute. But these are the new illustrations for that. But this is what I use when I teach. Now you guys might think it's silly, but I'm telling you, it works. I was a physician trainer for a company for a couple years all over the United States for long-term care. To this day, I have physicians all over that will text me and say, Cheryl, I'm eating a pear and I'm thinking of you. So just real quick, because this will make sense. So with a stage 1, that's your pear that has a little bit of a blushing look, okay? See my pear up there? And it's intact. With your stage 2, you don't like skin on your pear, right? So that's when our epidermis is gone, okay? Now I did put a little blister on my one pear, and it's serous filled, so that's the other part of that. Then our stage, oh my gosh, I messed up my pear. My pear's messed up, look. Okay, don't look at that. I have my unstageable as my, that's supposed to be a 3. Okay, I was just trying to fool you. Oh my goodness. Okay, don't look at that. Okay, the bite out of the pear is my stage 3. I'll never forget this. So when you take a bite out of your pear, that's a stage 3, okay? You're down into the subcutaneous. Your unstageable pear, I'm just going to go ahead and go down to that next photo there. That is your caramel pear. And this is the way you remember it. When you eat a pear that has caramel on it, you obviously take a bite out of it, right? That's how you know it's always going to be a stage 3 or 4 when that eschar and slough is gone. I know that sounds really weird, but that's how you remember that you know what tissue level of destruction, what's underneath there, okay? And then the 4, eat your pear to the core, stage 4. That's to the bone, okay? And then your deep tissue pressure injury, that's when you drop your pear and you have that either a blood blister or this is the new part of this. It can be intact or not intact. So that's the other part of that rule, or guideline, I should say. I'm so sorry about that pear being wrong, that number. The screening and assessment, we want to make sure we're using a risk assessment tool. And I think here in New Jersey, you guys use the push tool, right? Okay, I think so. We use the Braden, like in the United States. Okay, good. Okay, there you go. And we want to make sure we're doing this, on admission, and if you're in long-term care, there's different protocols. I'm going to let that go since there's hardly anybody in that setting. But one thing I always encourage, that if you're in any type of institution or facility, I always encourage skin sweeps. So whether that's weekly, monthly, it can be done by a wound nurse, a treatment nurse, or even a provider. And shower days are so important. I would always, really work with the nursing assistants to make sure they understand how important that is to identify, skin impairments. You catch them early, that's going to help with prevention, okay? A little bit about wound bed preparation. It's just so important when you're cleansing a wound. That is the first step to, prepping that wound. The wound cleansing gets left out for some reason. The nurses will go in there, they'll take the dressing off, and they'll slap the new one on. I'm not sure, I think we just, kind of get in a hurry. I'm not sure what the problem is. And then we also, a lot of nurses will smell the wound. You must smell the wound after you've cleansed it, not before, okay? A lot of people don't know that. So you cleanse the wound, then you smell it, okay? So don't call the doctor and say, oh my gosh, it stinks, it's infected. The first question I always say, well, did you cleanse it first? No. Well, cleanse it first and then call me back. I don't say that, but that's what I want to say. Okay, now this is very important. So with documenting pressure injuries, the way CMS wants us to do this is if you do not have a depth for your measurements, it is an incomplete record. So if I have a stage 1, what is my depth going to be? 0. because it's intact, right? If I have a deep tissue pressure injury, it's going to either be 0 or maybe 0.25 or what have you, because remember the new guideline is it's intact or not intact, right? They changed that one, so just keep that in mind. And then the other thing is with unstageable, I see this a lot in California, but you cannot use the abbreviation UTD. There is no such thing, unable to determine. Somebody started that, and I don't know who, but they really got it out there, and it's across the country. You must use some type of a depth, and it cannot be 0. Obviously, with unstageable, that wound, it's open because there's eschar. What's under eschar or slough? It's got to be a stage 3 or 4, right? So there's a break in the skin. So you can put 0.1, that's acceptable by CMS, and that's totally fine. If you can stick that cotton tip applicator deeper, go ahead and do that, that's fine, okay? Make sure you're using the correct wound tissue type. I also wrote about this in Woundsource. Scab versus eschar. Remember that scab is used with partial thickness wounds. If you're telling me you see a scab on a stage 3, that's a problem. Or if you see eschar, or if a physician says he or she debrided a scab off of a stage 3, that's incorrect. It's eschar. And that, it doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but it is when it comes down to reimbursement, billing, it's a big deal. Trying to think of here's one more example. So if I say I see granulation in a stage 2, that's a big no-no. There's no such thing as granulation in a stage 2. It starts at stage 3, okay? Very, very important. That's what state surveyors are getting nurses for in the nursing homes right now. They're becoming wound care certified, and now they think they know everything, and they're going after them with that. Am I okay on time?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. All right, make sure wound measurements are weekly, and remember to always change treatments after 2 weeks if there is no progress, especially with your silver dressings. If you're not getting, if there's not progress, you need to change it up. Obviously, there's a biofilm present. That's what they're looking for nowadays, okay? Things are changing with that. Just real quick with the measurements, I'm not going to go into big, great detail about this, except for we want to make sure we're using the national standard. We want to do head to toe and clock face. Do not do perpendicular. That is not acceptable unless you use that in a wound care center. That's where I come from over 10 years. If it's used in that setting, that's totally fine. But if you're in a certain, whether it's hospital, nursing home, what have you, you follow the national standard, okay? And then you're probably wondering why I put a picture of lips there. Remember that undermining is like taking your finger and swishing it under your lip. You're going to get the deepest point. Use your clock face. Same way with tunneling, you're getting the deepest point. And CMS is totally fine with you using +8 if you go longer than that cotton tip applicator. So +8 would be the one you can use. I just want to make sure you're getting all the new guidelines and facts here. The mobile app tracking, Brett already talked about this. That's out there with documentation, and then also we have all of our Wound Expert and other EMRs that are out. Obviously you're going to follow your templates and use those. If you are still using paper, please do not use terminology like pus, and making up all these different, use your red, pink, yellow, black, don't use the colors of the crayons. Oh my gosh, if you only seen the stuff I see. And here's the biggie. When you find a pressure injury, the first thing you're going to do, you're going to say that you offloaded, but here's the other thing. You're going to identify the cause, remove the cause. So if it's a state surveyor asking you what you did first, or an attorney, whoever, you're going to identify the cause. So, what caused that, and now you're going to get rid of it. You've got to resolve that issue. So If it's, grandma sitting in the Broda chair and it's too big for her and she's got that gravity force going on, you're gonna try and make sure she's positioned right in that chair, or maybe she needs a different chair, or a positioning device to keep her from, having that shearing going on. You've got to show that you are making a change to fix that situation, okay? There's over 3,500 wound care products out there. When I teach how to select a dressing, I make it very simple. I call it product confusion, and I'm not even going to go there. So I make it simple, and I teach dressing categories because I have to with wound care certification. I will tell you that our last speaker today, I've known her for a few years, the pretty lady in red. I'm going to tell you that that is my favorite product without endorsing that product. And I will tell you that that will make your life a lot easier, and it's a multifunctional dressing. I'll leave it at that. But I will tell you, it also matters where you're working, and I understand that. So if you are working somewhere where you cannot select what you want to go by the dressing categories, like collagen, alginate, honey, hydrogel, foam, hydrocolloid. This is my little chart that I use. It's published in Woundsource. If you guys want to look it up, all you do is punch in my name. You're more than happy to copy whatever. And this is a way that you can, pick what you want to use. A lot of the facilities use it. Because I'm not going to go through every little thing for you. We'd be here till, we'd have to have happy hour. You guys realize I usually speak 9 hours, believe it or not. When you teach wound care, it's an all-day thing. A little bit about, I want to make sure you have these little tidbits also. So with enzymatic debriders, there's only one, and I can say this because there's only one. So with Santal, I want to make sure you have this info. You always put it on a nickel thick, and it's always daily. You are not to be mixing, that is compounding, I keep seeing that also. We also have our sharp debridement. That's your fastest way to get rid of, devitalized tissue. Enzymatic, you'll see more in a nursing home or the autolytic debridement, which would be your hydrocolloid, or even, it's your turtle method, I guess you could say. So with the enzymatic debriding agent, Santal, I just want to point out, and there's literature out there by HealthPoint to back this up. There's only 2 silver dressings that are compatible with it because it deactivates the collagenase. So you want to make sure, I don't want to get into name brands here, but you want to make sure that you're looking at literature. There's 1 or 2 of the wound cleansers. Antibiotic ointments, you always want to make sure you put the antibiotic ointment down first. No compounding, and you want to look at the betadine. I see physicians ordering betadine and Santal. Just really pay attention to what you should be using and look, use evidence-based practice. There's a lot of things going on out there, and it's just crazy. With odor control, I always try to let everybody know about this too. There's charcoal dressings that are out there. This is the one thing I remember about my mother, and I can remember that smell still 20 years later, even though I smell wounds all the time. When that's your mom, it's different. And so when I have patients, I'm always the first one to say, hey, can we do this or that to control the odor? I don't want the family to remember that. So there are charcoal dressings. There's Metrogel. You can use flagyl sprinkles if it's a hospice patient. Otherwise, you need to use the Metrogel if it's in a different setting, or a different type of patient, I should say. And then Dakin's is also acceptable, if you want to control odor as well. And a little bit about negative pressure wound therapy. This is always, this can be used, as an adjunctive therapy. And I just want to point out, with pressure injuries, you never want to place the track pad over the coccyx because obviously we're adding pressure. what are we going to do? If they're laying on that track pad, we're adding pressure, right? So I have a FID. We want to make sure we bridge that over. I always bridge it over to the front, somewhere where they're not going to be laying on the tubing or the track pad, okay? But negative pressure wound therapy is also another treatment that is used. Ongoing education is key. The way I do things, I go to different facilities, and that's what my business entails of. But I will, you know, run a skill carnival. You wouldn't even believe the stuff I do. It's kind of crazy, but they always remember me. I'll use watermelons and have them measuring seeds as necrotic tissue, and I'll dig out tunnels, and I do all kinds of different training. But the nurses and the nursing assistants remember everything, and I make it fun. We do in-services, you know, the corporate chains, they hire me to come in and do all this training. And, you know, they remember this stuff, and then they end up, the one facility I'm in right now, they had 47% of skin impairments going on, not all pressure injuries. They have 3% now. I just got chills telling you that. But do you see what I'm talking about? That's what warms my heart and keeps me motivated. That's what it's all about, you guys. Oh my gosh, that's my crack. But you know, one-on-one training, skill check-offs, and I even do some of the online CEU type. There's portals like with thewoundinstitute.com and Medline University. There's different free portals where you can sign up for CEUs out there. Just assign a few to your staff. They're on wound care, and just say, hey, you know, do one a month. 15 minutes of your time, but you're learning something. It could be, you know, how to offload heels, whatever, okay? Just keep them, you know, learning something. And I'm getting to the end here. So Worldwide Pressure Injury Prevention Day is November 17th, so I'm gonna ask every single one of you, I want you to please do me a favor. I want you to educate one person, even if you show them how to offload a butt cheek or whatever. I want you to educate one person for me on November 17th. Are you going to do that? Thank you. And tomorrow, vote. Boy, that laugh was loud in the mic. I had to get it going a little at the end there. Okay, I'm done. Any questions? Oh, Lord. Any questions that you have?
Who changed the nomenclature from ulcer to injury, because that is a negative connotation. So
People that are bored. The National Pressure Ulcer Advisory Panel, but they didn't change their name. It's still ulcer. Isn't that nice? That's what cracks me up. They didn't change their board name. I'm trying to get on the board. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce Stephanie Murray, and she's about the foot amputation and patient functionality.
I wondered why I was going like this and I couldn't.
the mic was not on.
It was on for a while and then it shut off. God, I was cursed.
Cheryl, is that your laptop?
No, it's Brett's.
However,
I think I was cursed today.
the microphone's not working.
It was on and then it went off. I know. I even had two slides that were screwed up. No, these people you that mess up my slides. So embarrassed. Yeah, I think that's Brett's computer.
Project. I want to. The mic's not working, guys, but I don't need a mic. Was it working? When it comes to talking about Dr. Murray over here,
That's Brett's,
okay?
just so you know.
So, yeah. I've known Dr. Murray for 5 years now, and one of the hardest working, most dedicated to her patients. I could go on and on all day. You know, helps me with all things, everything. You know, my exo brain, I'll say that, you know. So, I won't bore you guys to death, but yeah, amazing person, amazing for the patients, and it's a real honor, pleasure, and treat to have her speak here. Thank you guys, please. Thank you, thank you.
Okay, just so that everybody gets out of here being a diabetic, there are cookies and snacks over there. So make sure you knock yourself out. But don't knock yourself out. Or keep you awake. I think there's coffee and tea also. So please, let's have a relaxing afternoon. I love this talk because it's really what I was trained to do, what I was born